Yeah, sweet. I've started recording it now. So
Okay, amazing. Because between the two of us figuring out a screen record, it's not that great.
I think it's the host that can actually record it properly. So I've recorded that now, and then what I can do is just send it through to you.
We knew we hired you for a reason, Soph.
To be honest, yesterday I couldn't even get Zoom to work. James was like, "Can you send me the link?" I was like, "Yeah, it'll be easy." And then I was like, "Shit, how do I do it?" I would join someone else's Zoom, never actually have to. And then James was like, "I'm with you for tech," and I'm like, "Well, I don't know about Zoom."
Whenever I've got an Instagram question, I'm like, Sophie.
Literally, I was like, "Well, you do your webinars every Tuesday. You tell me about Zoom." Okay. Let me know when you want me to sort of. Am I waiting on anyone else, or is that kind of everything?
Who have we got in?
Ree just texted me saying she is coming, but I think she's already in. I'm not sure if she's in or not.
So Sam, Patrick, Floribin, Anthony. Yeah, there is a few more I would be expecting. So I'd say if we give it a couple of minutes.
Ree is in. She's on Patrick's one.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, cool.
Not a problem. Good thing to do in lockdown, PT qualification. Kind of wish I got to do mine in lockdown.
It is really good, apart from obviously there's no face-to-face stuff.
Like, oh yeah, of course. So what?
So obviously that's and to me, I know obviously I don't know if you're going to touch on this with everyone, but I know you run your business online, which for where you've got to is awesome, and a lot of the industry is going that way. But obviously from a perspective of a new person coming into the industry, being able to have that face-to-face kind of interaction with us as tutors and other learners, and in that gym environment is kind of vital, really. So
100%.
but hopefully everyone can go through the theory, and then when we get back into gyms, we'll have a few decent practical sessions with Kiva as well. Kiva's been helping us out loads with practical stuff.
So is there a practical element to the course then? So when I did mine, like I had to do a certain amount of hours with a PT.
Yeah, it's not the same as we spoke about this before, didn't we?
Yeah.
It's not quite the same as which by the way is great, the way they do it in Australia, and I think they do it that way in America as well. You have to do a certain amount of hours, like on a gym floor or with a PT, or but yeah, no, you don't have to do that in this country. But that being said, obviously, if you can get that experience, it's
100%.
Way better. I think what we got now, Ben, Flora, Patrick. Yeah, let's get started. Awesome. So yeah, let's get started, and
Yeah, sweet. Okay, well, I'll just quickly introduce myself. So my name's Sophie, and I actually worked with Saskia and James in Brighton in the gym, the actual gym, the name of it. And yeah, so now I am fully online, which I can touch on in this webinar. I'll try and run through the slides like quickly because there is a lot of information. So I'm obviously going to be talking about, training females and training women and how it's different to training, males. And we can't just give the same approach to both males and females, especially when it comes to dieting as well. And obviously training wise, females tend to want different goals to men anyway. So, yeah, I think it's really important to, especially early on as well, like you guys are obviously coming in fresh, I'm assuming. So it's a really good time for you to kind of like pick up this knowledge before you like get a couple years down the line, like, and then have to either relearn it or, start kind of fresh when you've been in the industry for so long. So I'm going to be talking about that today. If you have any questions, feel free to just type them in the chat or unmute yourself. Otherwise at the end, I've kind of like put a slide for questions anyway. So I've kind of tried to crunch down the main, the main things that you'd need to know for training women, as there is so much information I could go through in depth, but I just wanted to keep it simple today and go through the core things that are probably going to be most useful. And then obviously if you have any questions, you can always ask me throughout. And then at the end as well, what James touched on at the start with me being online, I will go through a little bit of that if anyone is interested, and just give my opinion on how that differs to PT and stuff, if anyone's interested. And then, yeah, if you've got any questions, we can go through that. So what I'll do is just share my screen. This is where it gets messy. I'm like, where am I? All right. Sweet. So can everyone see my screen here?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sweet. Okay, perfect. Awesome. So going to be touching on, most importantly, the menstrual cycle a lot throughout this slide presentation, purely because that is obviously the main difference that women and men have. And it's a really important difference because a women's menstrual cycle affects, you know, training, nutrition, mood, like literally the whole body throughout the whole cycle. So let me just mute that. Yeah, awesome. So starting with the phases of the menstrual cycle, there is 4 phases, and this is quite in depth, but honestly, the more you know about it, the better you're going to be. I personally don't think there's like never too much you can learn about this topic, especially if you will be training females, because every female has a menstrual cycle, unless there is menstrual disorders, which we'll touch on down the track. And understanding this can really help you understand your clients, what they're going through, why they maybe aren't, you know, sticking to their deficit calories if they are in a fat loss phase, or why they may be struggling with training, or just things like that. So we've got 4 phases of the menstrual cycle. It may be a little bit hard to read, but I'm going to talk about it anyway, so hopefully it's not too hard to read. First phase, we have menstruation. So this is the actual period itself. This is day 1. So day 1 of the cycle starts with the first day of bleeding, or the first day of the period. So what happens in this phase is, just before, you know, the period starts, progesterone and estrogen, which we'll talk about through the slides as well, are the 2 main sex hormones of women. And they actually drop like just before the period starts to trigger the shedding of the endometrial lining. So that is why we get the period, and that is why most women probably feel a little bit shit at that time. You know, both the main hormones that are really good for, you know, energy, mood, all that kind of stuff completely drop, and that's why we tend to feel effects at that stage, which I'll go through soon. And understanding this can help you understand your clients as well, you know, why they may be feeling shitty at some points of the month, and why they may be able to stick to calories really well for a couple of weeks and then go off the rails another week. So understanding this can really help. So then we move into the follicular phase, which actually begins on day 1 as well. But these are the 4 main phases. So it can be a little bit confusing, but the follicular phase actually starts on day 1 of the cycle along with menstruation. But just for ease of the phases, that's why I've just put them separate. So the follicular phase is where estrogen is the dominant hormone. So the ovaries are actually promoting the growth of follicles containing an immature egg in this phase. The first few days of, you know, the women's period, hormones tend to stay fairly flat. The period should last around 4 to 7 days. So that's the kind of average number we want. And once the period does finish, estrogen will kind of start to slowly rise again just before ovulation. So in this phase, estrogen is the main hormone. So what that does is, you know, promote the growth of follicles containing immature eggs to then ovulate. Then we move into ovulation. Now, this is the main event of the cycle. What happens with ovulation is we actually get our essential hormones through ovulation. So estrogen peaks just before ovulation to actually, you know, push the follicles into releasing a mature egg, obviously ready to be fertilized. So this is the main event of the cycle. Now, what happens here is the released egg, the follicle that releases the egg actually turns into a corpus luteum. So what this is it's a temporary endocrine gland, which I'll go through later on the slides as well. It changes rapidly. So once the egg's released, the follicle has to literally like transform itself into a mini endocrine gland within like 24 hours. And this is what releases progesterone, which is our other sex hormone opposite to estrogen. So ovulation is actually a 24-hour average event, unless in the rare case of second ovulation, it will be maybe 48 hours. So we say usually about 24 to 48, purely because if another egg is released again within that 24 hours, it could end up being 48 hours maximum. So that's how twins are made, if another egg is released during ovulation, which obviously is unlikely, but we just say 24 to 48 hours just to kind of, keep it like understandable and stuff. So the luteal phase starts straight after ovulation. So as you can see here, the follicle that ruptured to release the egg transforms into the corpus luteum, and that's the main source of progesterone. Now, we cannot get progesterone from any other part. Like, there's nothing else we can get progesterone from. This is the only way we make progesterone. So if someone isn't ovulating, it means they won't have progesterone, possible hormonal imbalances, because estrogen compared to progesterone will be too high. And there's a heap of other problems that could arise down the track, which again we'll go through. So the lifespan of the corpus luteum is about 10 to 16 days. So this means that because the luteal phase begins like straight after ovulation when the corpus luteum is formed, the luteal phase will depend on, how long the corpus luteum actually survives for, which is, we say, 10 to 16 days. And then obviously on the last day of the luteal phase, this is where, progesterone starts to drop a lot. Estrogen kind of drops, we peak at ovulation, and then it kind of slowly declines. It doesn't drop straight away. But then when we get to menstruation, progesterone drops really massively. Estrogen is still, it's not high, but it's still there. It does drop as well. So hormones drop just before menstruation. That's when we get the period. So average cycle lengths, this should actually say 21 to 35 days. Everyone's going to be different, which is why, everywhere you look will have different average cycle lengths. This women's health specialist may say 26 to 35. This one may say 28 to 35. Like, it really does depend on the information that you're getting. So this is actually from one of my favorite women's health people that I've learned this from. And she says 20 to 35 days. So ideally we want it to be around 28 to 30. That's going to be like the most optimal. But if someone does have a cycle that's 20 to 35 days, like I said, everyone's going to be different. Just because there's like set things that happen throughout the menstrual cycle doesn't mean every single woman's going to be the same, which is important when you're training female clients, especially if you're kind of online like I am. I'll go through this at the end as well, because it could probably tie in. But yeah, so you just have to keep that in mind, that yes, the events are the same, but each female may respond differently, different cycle lengths, stuff like that. So we just have to keep that in mind. So estrogen and the follicular phase. So this is the day one of the period. That's when the follicular phase starts. So follicle stimulating hormone is FSH. I haven't put these in depth because this is where it can get quite in depth. So I just wanted to kind of keep it as simple as I could, just with the menstrual cycle side. But FSH is a hormone that's released, and it actually pushes, the ovaries and the follicles to, make more estrogen so that we can ovulate. So estradiol is the estrogen that is made by the developing follicles. It is the happy hormone, that's what they say. It's good for skin, the mood, gut, brain, like mitochondria, which is deep inside your cells, immune function, heart health, muscles and insulin sensitivity, and even like bone density as well. So if someone has lost their period, which I will go through, called hypothalamic amenorrhea, the main concern for this is loss of bone density, because if they don't have a period, they're not producing these hormones that women need. So that's something that estrogen is really good with. And something else to keep in mind as well, if you have women that are maybe around the age of, 40 onwards, they could potentially be going through perimenopause and then menopause once they kind of hit around 50. We say around because it's not the same for everyone. And what actually happens here is, in perimenopause, estrogen kind of goes up and down like a roller coaster, whereas menopause, it kind of declines, which is why it's really important for women around, you know, or throughout the whole lifespan, but especially when they do get to that stage, to continue weight training, just to maintain bone and muscle health and strength and stuff like that. So estrogen has a lot of benefits, as you can see here. The length of the follicular phase won't exactly be 14 days. It's just an average, because 14 is kind of, if we say an average cycle of 28 to 30 days, 14 is kind of in the middle of that, and ovulation happens in the middle of the cycle. So doesn't mean you're definitely going to ovulate on day 14. It's different for everyone, but we just say that for an average. So the follicular phase will depend on when you ovulate. It could be day 1 to day 18 if you ovulate on day 18. So it just depends, but we say roughly about half. So then we head into ovulation, which is the main event. The main event of the cycle and the most important event. So when one follicle reaches the finish line, the dominant follicle swells, and then luteinizing hormone, which is LH, triggers the ovaries to actually release an egg. So as you can see here, women don't always ovulate every single month. Now, you'll tend to find that around kind of the follicular middle of the follicular phase. So just as the period's finishing, maybe let's say day 5 to 7, just to average it up, onwards through ovulation until probably about day 21 to 25 is when your female clients, or yourselves if you're a female, are probably going to feel your best. You know, adherence will be pretty good with dieting. Training will probably feel pretty good strength wise and energy wise. Even just general like life motivation and mood will be good as well during this kind of like middle of the cycle. And then sort of around ovulation when estrogen peaks, and then just after estrogen when progesterone is high, is usually when women feel their best. So if you understand the cycle and what's going on, you can actually help your sort of female clients, you know, understand why, you know, sometimes they may be feeling a bit weaker. Let's say they're getting their period in 3 days and they're feeling shit and they're like, I don't know why I'm so weak. Last week I was lifting this. If they track their cycle, or if you have an understanding of it and you're like, you know, are you due for your period soon? And they're like, yeah, probably in about 3 days. You can be like, well, there you go. You know, you're heading for your period in 3 days. Hormones are starting to drop. This is probably not a good time to be aiming for like PVs and stuff like that. And, you know, it's normal to feel this way at this time of the cycle. So it just can help some people understand what's going on. But general rule of thumb is mid-cycle ovulation is where people are going to feel the best, both general life mood, in the gym, training, adherence to dieting and stuff like that. So women don't always ovulate every single month. Obviously, you know, we ovulate most months, but it isn't unusual to have an anovulatory cycle occasionally, which is where they just don't ovulate. But if this is continuing into, you know, more than just a few, we definitely want to look into that. PCOS, which again, I'll go into, and hypothalamic amenorrhea don't have ovulation, or very little cycles, or no cycles at all if it's hypothalamic amenorrhea. You also do not ovulate on hormonal birth control. That's how hormonal birth control works. But ovulation is how we make our hormones. So just important to remember, oh, I'm going too far. Just important to remember that if you or your clients are on birth control, the cycle won't really have the same, it's a rule of thumb, obviously. Like, it's kind of confusing because a lot of people don't understand that they don't have a proper cycle when they're on hormonal birth control. But it's just important to keep in mind, just so that you, especially if you're a female yourself, because I find that most females tend to train female clients more so than like male clients. So it just can help you, and sort of you understand them and help them understand them as well. So obviously someone that's on this hormonal birth control won't ovulate, so they're actually not getting this, you know, progesterone that I'm talking about. So just to keep in mind so that we don't get confused. So then we head into the luteal phase, where progesterone is the dominant hormone. So the length of this phase is usually 10 to 16 days, but this is obviously depending on how long the corpus luteum actually lives for. So progesterone peaks as the corpus luteum secretes it. So straight after ovulation, corpus luteum is transformed from the follicle, and progesterone is at its highest, which is why, as I said just in the previous slide, why women will probably feel best around this stage, because estrogen peaks just before ovulation. ovulation will happen, and then progesterone is still high before they kind of decline. So progesterone is good for a whole lot of things. So first of all, the health of the corpus luteum is actually affected by everything that affected your follicles during the 100 days. So they say that your follicles need 100 days kind of nourishment and health to actually like bloom into a mature egg and be released. So if you think about how crazy the menstrual cycle is, you know, an egg is released and that follicle needs to transform into a hormone secreting gland within 24 hours. That takes a lot of energy and also, you know, a lot of health as well, which is why training and nutrition is so important for, you know, a deep inside things other than just looking great. You know, it's great for your menstrual cycle. It's great health for fertility and just stuff like that as well. And I say fertility, like, doesn't mean that if you don't want kids, it doesn't mean that fertility is not important. As you can see, ovulation is how we make hormones. Ovulation isn't just for, you know, falling pregnant. It's so great for so many other things. So as you can see here, it's great, as you can see here, thyroid disease, insulin problems, inflammation, vitamin deficiencies can all affect those follicles. I talk about progesterone on the next slide. I'm getting confused. But yeah, so all of these things can affect the follicles, even smoking, alcohol, poor diet, stuff like that. If your follicles aren't good, then your cycle's gonna, you know, struggle, and it may not be what we want it to be. So the follicle requires good health and nutrition, like I've just mentioned, for a solid about 100 days. So that's just over 3 months. And then it must have enough oomph and vitality to actually form the corpus luteum in 1 day. So like I said, this is why general health and nutrition, even exercise and stuff, is actually really important for period health as well. So now we're going to progesterone. Obviously, its main job is to nourish and hold pregnancy. But outside of that, it actually counterbalances estrogen. So we say that it's the yin to estrogen's yang. So like yin and yang work together. So estrogen thickens the endometrium lining, progesterone thins it. So for example, someone who may have very heavy periods may have an imbalance between estrogen and progesterone. If you have super heavy periods that are kind of beyond the scope of normal, as you can see here, progesterone thins the lining, which is what sheds during the period. If estrogen is sort of higher than progesterone, then estrogen is going to thicken that lining. Progesterone isn't there to thin it as much, and that's how we can potentially end up with heavy periods. Progesterone also boosts the thyroid hormone and estrogen suppresses it. So there's going to be like different opposites that each one do. But genuinely, they are really good for like a whole bunch of things like muscles, just like estrogen is, reducing inflammation. Progesterone is actually really good for sleep, and it's kind of like the calm hormone. So they tend to say that after ovulation, women tend to be able to, you know, cope with stress a bit more, or a bit better, I should say. They feel a bit calmer, and they usually have really good sleep because of progesterone. So it's really good for sleep and, you know, calming the nervous system and stuff like that. So healthy periods will lead to progesterone, because how is progesterone created? Through ovulation. If you don't ovulate, you won't produce progesterone at all. Now, there is progestin found in birth control, which often people are given and told that it's progesterone, but it's not. If you look at the actual structure, like the chemical compound structure of it, or the hormone structure, it's actually not the same at all. They're different. So just keep that in mind if anyone kind of, it can get confusing between the names, but progestin is a synthetic hormone. Progesterone is what we produce. Now, PMS. So now we've gone over the kind of hormones, the phases of the cycle. Now we're going to kind of go into PMS, which is obviously important, because if you have female clients, they will most likely experience this. If you're a female yourself, you probably have experienced this and may do every month. So what is PMS, premenstrual syndrome? It's usually that for some people, it can be the week leading up to the period, which is quite a long time. Others, it may just be the few days before. So if you understand like these kind of things, it just helps you understand female clients a little bit better, because the best way to describe it is men's hormones kind of just stay like this every month. Women's kind of go like up and down, like they fluctuate, and that's why we can get symptoms like this. So just obviously, like, women know that we get PMS if you're a woman yourself, whether it is if you're a male. You may not understand this as much, which is 100% fair enough because you've not gone through it. So just understanding this can maybe help you understand why your female clients are, you know, starving, why they're feeling really shit, why they might not be doing very well in the gym, why they might be skipping workouts, stuff like that. So PMS tends to be around hunger, like involve hunger and cravings. I'll go through this one in a second. Like feeling lethargic and fatigued is very common. Feeling less energized and weaker in the gym, menstrual cramps or low back pain, headaches or migraines, water retention or bloating, and even some severe cases of PMS can actually have depression or just suicidal thoughts around 2 weeks before the period, 1 to 2 weeks before the period arrives. So if you ever come across a client that experiences really bad PMS, I think it can be important to kind of like notice it, because PMS has become very normalized in society with a lot of jokes about it. And it obviously, like, it's fine to joke about it, but I think because everyone jokes about it, people kind of go, oh yeah, I get that too, it's fine. Like, they just think, you know, oh, it's common, everyone else gets it, it's normal, when actually it's not. So some people might not realize that what they're experiencing isn't normal, or they don't have to do it. So if you do ever get a client and you notice that they may be quite depressed in the couple weeks leading up to their period, but after their period they're fine, or you start noticing a trend, it could be PMDD. And definitely just recommend them go to the doctor, track their cycle, and then, you know, the doctor can maybe help or diagnose them with PMDD. So PMS is common, but it's not normal. Around the time of a women's period, I don't know why it says she there, her adherence may drop, including nutrition and training, due to PMS. So this, I find, is what can make fat loss appear slower for women. So I think I've got another slide on this, but basically with men, apart from the obvious of having more muscle mass and testosterone, women tend to have a week of the month where they may be hungrier, cravings increase, energy decreases. So getting to the gym becomes a lot harder, and sticking to, you know, calories, especially if they're in the fat loss phase, becomes a lot harder as well. So I guess because this kind of happens over the course of, let's just average it out and say a week, everyone's different. Like I said before, some people may not experience anything, which is great if they don't. Some people may experience all of it. And that's where we want to maybe delve deeper and help them manage that. Refer on to someone who can maybe help them. But understanding what's going on can maybe help you understand them. So, you know, this can make fat loss appear slower or harder for women because there is a week of like, let's say a 4-week cycle to be average, where they may not be adhering as much as what they were in the first 3 weeks. So got a few things you can maybe try for this. So we'll go through that in a second. So period problems, PCOS. PCOS is very common. I think it's about 1 in 10 women have PCOS. It might even be bigger now. And it seems to be, there's not enough research on it, but it seems to be becoming like too popular. And this isn't known why yet. So we're not actually sure why PCOS happens, or where it comes from, if it's genetic or if you're born with it. We just don't know yet. There isn't enough research, but I do believe that there is research sort of like happening at the moment that's coming out. There's 4 main drivers of PCOS. Now, this is going to be out of a PT's scope to kind of like, unless you're a women's health coach and you like or I guess you've studied and you know how to help a client with PCOS in this much depth, then it's going to be probably out of your scope and something that you may need to refer onto. Now, it's just, I think personally, it's important to understand PCOS because it is so common. So just because you cannot, you know, read blood work and, you know, do stuff like that for someone with PCOS, I still think that it could be useful just to understand what PCOS is and sort of where it comes from, what happens with it and stuff like that, because chances are you will come across a client with PCOS. There's 4 main drivers of it. So PCOS is kind of like just a blanket name for it. There's inflammatory PCOS, adrenal PCOS, insulin resistance PCOS, which is the most common. I think it's about 70% of people with PCOS have insulin resistance, and that's the main driver. There's post-pill PCOS, which can occur. Hidden cause PCOS. So this could maybe, you know, be because of thyroid, vitamin deficiencies, high prolactin, which is another hormone, you know, not enough food or carbohydrates, stuff like that. So this is where you'd have to investigate further. And obviously this is something for the doctor, but it's just important to understand what can be going on. I mean, even if, you know, yourself as a female or someone you may know be having PCOS, this information could come in handy because it seems to be very common. So PCOS cannot be detected by an ultrasound. It's actually a group of symptoms related to anovulation, which means not ovulating, and a high level of androgens or male hormones. So this condition is basically elevated male hormones and, you know, irregular cycles and stuff like that. Now, something has to drive the male hormones to be secreted and be elevated, and that's where these drivers come in. So, for example, insulin resistance within the body, it's a bit of a complicated process, so I won't go through it. But basically, the high levels of insulin and the insulin resistance can actually drive the ovaries to secrete more male hormones. And that can affect cycles, make them irregular, possibly not ovulating and stuff like that. So the main sort of, I guess, like point of PCOS is that it is elevated male hormones. Like that's what it is. Polycystic ovaries can occur with PCOS. So PCOS actually stands for polycystic ovarian syndrome, but it's not specific to PCOS. So it's really confusing because the name doesn't really match what it is. They're actually trying to change the name so that it's not polycystic ovarian syndrome, because that's not what PCOS is. You can have PCOS without having cysts on your ovaries. And you can have cysts on your ovaries without having PCOS. So all of these things can happen to females, and you may come across someone with PCOS, so it can be important just to kind of understand what's going on, you know, at least if you know, okay, yeah, PCOS is where, you know, male hormones elevated. What can we do for these clients that may be different to others? So we'll go through that here. So an endocrine and metabolic condition is what PCOS is. So to be diagnosed, a woman qualifies when she meets all three of the following criteria: irregular periods or polycystic ovaries on an ultrasound. So that's just one criteria, which explains why you can't diagnose PCOS with just an ultrasound by itself, because that's only a small part of the actual condition itself. As you can see here, it's not just an endocrine, it's a metabolic condition as well. High androgens on a blood test or symptoms of high androgens. Now, symptoms of high androgens could be weight gain in a male pattern, so like around the stomach for some women. It can be acne on the jawline. It can be excess hair growth in places like the face, chest, stuff like that. And it can be dark hairs as well, kind of similar to a male, because it's usually elevated androgens and testosterone. So acne, hair, like excess hair that's too much for a woman to have, can be massive signs. Hair loss as well, and probably, I would say, weight gain in general, but it does happen in a male pattern, kind of around the abdomen, where males tend to store more of their fat, whereas females tend to be kind of like the hips and thighs and stuff like that. So the biggest driver of PCOS is, oh, sorry, I missed this one. Other reasons for high androgens have been ruled out. So PCOS isn't the only thing that involves high androgens. So other things need to be ruled out before someone can be diagnosed with PCOS, to make sure it isn't maybe a thyroid issue or something like that. The biggest driver of PCOS is insulin resistance. So training someone with PCOS doesn't need to be complicated, but it will just be beneficial to involve, you know, insulin resistance management. So if you are, obviously it depends if you give nutrition advice or not. As an online coach, I actually do both training and nutrition. When I was a PC on the gym floor, I mainly just did training. So it could just be good to know this, but if you think, I mean, 70% of women with PCOS have insulin resistance. They can obviously get tested for this with blood tests. There's a couple different ones. I can't remember the exact ones, but obviously they can get tested for that with the doctor. Now, if someone does have insulin resistance, then, you know, things like limiting sugars that's going to spike insulin, making sure they're having enough protein, especially protein with every meal as well, so that it actually like slows down the rate that the carbohydrates are absorbed. And also weight training. really good for insulin resistance. So one thing I find with PCOS is a lot of coaches tend to give women with PCOS loads of HIIT training, because as I've written here, it can be harder for some, keyword some, people with PCOS to lose weight because of the other issues. Now, whether those issues are directly related to insulin resistance, or whether they may be more of a mental thing and a hormonal thing where, you know, it just makes their hunger hormones, you know, a bit out of whack, meaning they may crave a lot more foods, they may be hungrier than normal, and therefore eat more than they need to lose weight. Or it may just be harder for them to actually eat less, if that makes sense. So it can be harder for some people with PCOS to lose weight, but don't nail them with just endless HIIT training. Weight training is still super beneficial for people with insulin resistance or PCOS. And obviously, you know, like building muscle for women in general is really important as well. So I had a coach message me a few weeks ago and just said, oh, I've got a client with PCOS, not losing weight. I've given her 5 HIIT training sessions a week. I've given her 10,000 steps a day. And it just seems to be because some people think that they're not losing weight, they're like, yeah, we'll nail them with cardio, when actually you probably want to do the opposite. So strength training and protein are really important for people with PCOS. So I know all of that can be a little bit confusing. I just think it can be helpful to understand what it is, because it's that popular now that chances are you will come across a client with PCOS. But the main thing to keep in mind is strength training and protein is important for them. So don't feel like you need to go out of your scope. You know, you don't need to go and read blood tests and stuff. As a personal trainer, that's not your job. You don't need to worry about that. I just think it can be important to maybe understand it, so that if a client needs it, you can be like, oh, okay, you know, maybe you should go to the doctor and ask about this, you know. Next, we'll go on to hypothalamic amenorrhea. Now, this is an important one because this actually directly relates to like under eating, overtraining, and stuff like that. So hypothalamic amenorrhea is a loss of period for 6 months or more with no other diagnosis. So that means that all other diagnoses for the missing period have actually been ruled out. So for example, PCOS. Sometimes hypothalamic amenorrhea and PCOS get like tangled up, and it means that someone could potentially be either misdiagnosed or miss a diagnosis altogether. So hypothalamic amenorrhea needs to be, you know, once everything else is ruled out. So if you do have a client who hasn't had a period for this long, I think it may even be 3 to 6 months, but 6 months is the general kind of like rule of thumb, where it kind of gets to 6 months and you're like, okay, we need to definitely look into this. Now, the pill can mask hypothalamic amenorrhea, because when you're on the pill, you don't actually have a proper period. It's a withdrawal bleed, which means that it could actually be masking hypothalamic amenorrhea, meaning that it could kind of be covering up and you don't know you've got it. So that's also important to keep in mind as well. So before discussing any treatment for hypothalamic amenorrhea, it's important to make sure it's not caused by too much soy in the diet or for phytoestrogens. Usually veg or like vegetarian or vegan can be more of an issue for this. So if you do have a client that has, you know, maybe lost their period, it's important to just maybe like check, are they vegan or vegetarian? Do they eat a lot of soy? Maybe reducing that may sort of help it in like over the next few months. So things like that as well. Coming off the pill can also cause this. So some people actually don't get a period for even up to a year after coming off the pill. But usually it's caused by some sort of stress. So the hypothalamus in the brain does not think your body is ready to hold a pregnancy. So it just ceases the hormones needed to ovulate altogether. So it's basically like, yeah, you know, we're not in a good place to hold a pregnancy right now. We're just going to stop, like shut down all the communication. So that's why the period can actually go missing. Now, the two main causes are actually under eating, and you don't need to be underweight to have hypothalamic amenorrhea, although there is a stat, I think about 66% of people with hypothalamic amenorrhea have actually had an eating disorder as well. So as you can see, it does correlate kind of with having, you know, low body fat levels, overtraining, under eating, possibly a combination of all three, and stress, because, you know, under eating is a form of stress to the body. So that's the main causes of hypothalamic amenorrhea. And this could be important to understand, so that when you are training women, it's important to remember that women cannot handle like extreme low calorie diets like men can. Men can probably, you know, like with bodybuilding competitions and stuff, men can probably handle lower calorie diets and not really have much an effect. They might lose their libido a bit. They might, you know, obviously be fatigued from low calorie diets and stuff like that. But they genuinely tend to be okay like afterwards. Whereas women, when going really low calories, it really does affect the menstrual cycle. It affects, you know, obviously if it affects the menstrual cycle, it means it's going to affect the main sex hormones that we produce with the cycle, and then that can lead to a lot of other issues as well. So women cannot handle low calorie diets as well as men can, and you know, low calorie diet or high amounts of training or a mixture of both can cause hypothalamic amenorrhea. Now, obviously refer out to a doctor for this, but usually the treatment is honestly reducing exercise and eating more. I mean, it's caused by under eating and possibly over exercising as well. The main treatment is reducing exercise to only low intensity. So I'm talking like yoga, walking, like nothing high intensity at all. It's going to cause stress to the body, and eating like way above surplus to make sure that their body is not in a low energy availability state, and the body has enough energy to actually be like, okay, like we're ready to hold a pregnancy, we can start ovulating and having a period again. So if you ever get a client that has lost a period through training with you, definitely keep an eye on it. It's something to be aware of, because some people may not think it's an issue. And I think as well that it can be detrimental to women. So just making sure that if you are doing nutrition as well, you know, they're not being like given too low of calories or anything like that, because women just cannot tolerate it. It's not good for them. So if you ever get a client that maybe is like, you know, haven't had a period in a few months, I would definitely probably cease training and then just send them to a doctor just to make sure. The quicker you get on top of it, the quicker it will come back. So I actually had hypothalamic amenorrhea when I was about 16. I didn't have a period for 2 years. I was very lean, like talking like full six pack, was 100% under eating and was over exercising. So I actually didn't have one for 2 years, which is quite a long time. Now it can come back within about 3 to 6 months if you kind of like tackle it early on. So yeah, so definitely important one to be aware of, because it tends to happen with, you know, training and under eating and stuff, which is obviously what we're involved with. So the body needs to be fully nourished in every respect. So that means enough calories and micronutrients such as like iodine and zinc. So a wide like variety of a diet, fruit, veg, meat, stuff like that. Meat's actually really good for menstrual cycles. So this is where being vegan or vegetarian can have an effect. I think a lot of people jumping on the vegan bandwagon have nothing against vegans, but I think a lot of people are jumping onto it because they think it's a healthier diet, or they think it's a lower calorie diet that's going to help them lose fat. And it's not. There's nothing wrong with being vegan, but you just would need to make sure that you are getting the essential minerals you're missing from not having meat. Carbs are really important for women as well. Low carb diets, you can actually lose your period to low carb diet, even if calories are adequate. So that's important to remember as well. So like I've just said it here, sorry, I didn't even see it. Under eating carbs can impair the hypothalamus in your brain, signaling to the ovaries and cause amenorrhea, even if the calories are enough. If you feel better on a low carb diet, ask yourself, is it because you're not having any wheat? Is it because you've relieved a digestive problem that you may get from, I don't know, gluten or anything like that? So some people will claim that they feel better on a low carb diet, but ask yourself, is it the low carb, or is it something else that you've maybe cut out or reduced as a result of that? I said this in the last one, I was close. 63% of young women with hypothalamic amenorrhea go on to be diagnosed with an eating disorder. So as you can see, it is definitely correlated with, you know, under eating being probably the main one, and then potentially overtraining and very low levels of body fat as well. So supplements, weight gain, reducing stress, reducing exercise intensity can help. The pill does not cure it, as the pill is not a real bleed, or not a real period. So often, myself included, when I went to the doctor, because I was 16, my mom took me, I thought it was great not having a period, but I had no idea about the side effects at the time. Went to the doctor and they were like, yeah, like, you know, here's the pill. And that was it. That's all I got. So yeah, it's just important to realize that, you know, if you have someone who may have this, then send them to the doctor, obviously. But if they do just get handed the pill, it's also really important for them to, you know, eat more, lower the exercise intensity, just stuff like that as well. And I think as trainers, we tend to be the ones that understand this a little bit more from the training and nutrition side, whereas most people will get given the pill when they go to the doctor. So if you have a client like this, definitely reduce exercise intensity, increase calories. Too much prolactin can also inhibit ovulation or periods, which is why it's important that every other diagnosis like PCOS, elevated prolactin, you know, maybe thyroid problems as well are all ruled out. Calories and menstrual cycles. So here we go into kind of the nutrition side. Some people say, you know, because we're more insulin sensitive at half of the cycle than we are the other half. Some people say, oh, you know, like increase fats in the follicular phase, increase carbs in the luteal phase and stuff like that, because we actually burn more energy in the luteal phase due to increased body temperature, which I forgot to mention, so I apologize. But in the luteal phase, progesterone actually increases, oh, here we go, put it here. Progesterone actually increases body temperature, which means that's why we tend to get quite hungry in the second half of the cycle. And, you know, some people say like, make sure carbs are higher that side and then fats are higher in the follicular phase, but you don't need to overcomplicate it. I think unless you're an elite level athlete or anything like that, I really don't think it's necessary, because calories are always going to be the main thing. So I wouldn't stress too much about that. If anything, I personally don't do this either, because if I, you know, had to track 30, 40 clients' menstrual cycles and be like, yeah, you're at day 1, you need to go higher fats. You're at day 14, you need to go higher carbs. It's just going to get too messy. So really don't need to overcomplicate it. But if anything, diet breaks or refeeds, which is a period of increased calories after dieting, can be implemented around a period, as women tend to have more hunger and cravings during this time anyway. So like I've said here, it's unnecessary to split the luteal and follicular between high fat, high carb. Total calories is still going to be the king for fat loss. So don't overcomplicate it for yourself as well. If needed, women should increase calories by about 100 to 300 calories a day before and a couple of days of the period if they need it. So I actually give my clients the option. I ask when I check in with my clients, which I can run through at the end as well, how I run my clients is I ask them where they're at in their cycle so that I can kind of see what their weight is, because women's scale weight will increase with the period. If it doesn't increase, it may just maintain. So more often than not, if I've got a client that's maintained their weight or they've gained weight when they are in a fat loss phase, and I can see they're maybe, you know, 2 days before their period, day 2 of their period, I can be like, okay, weight's higher on their period, about to get their period. I can put the 2 and 2 together and be like, okay, that's definitely why that's happening. But I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but yeah, increasing the calories before and a couple days of the period if they need it. Like I give my clients the option. I'm kind of like, you know, I'd rather you increase your calories by 200 or 300 to satisfy your cravings rather than try and put them off and then go completely like crazy a couple days later because you just, you know, you're so hungry. And because women burn more at rest due to the elevated body temperature in the second half of the cycle, increasing calories by a couple hundred for a few days really won't be too detrimental to fat loss at all. So I think that's important to remember as well, just that, you know, some women may be really hungry and have really bad cravings, and, you know, women diet on lower calories than men anyway. So I think increasing calories can be a really good tool to use for women if they need to, depending on how they feel. For me, it's usually 2 days before and like the first day or 2 of. For others, it can be the week before and nothing when they get their period. So this is something obviously personal to the client. So dieting and fat loss for females. Women are worse at dieting than men. Like, it's literally a fact. Bodies are more, like, women's bodies are more efficient at storing fat than men due to like holding pregnancy and childbearing and periods and stuff like that. So women need fat for hormonal health and, you know, even just for holding pregnancy and stuff like that. So that's something to keep in mind, that if you are a male, like, it may be hard to understand why a female client is struggling to stick to a diet. I saw something the other day that I thought was really interesting about women's hunger hormones, like the ghrelin and leptin, are actually, you know, a bit different throughout the cycle as well, which can be why at times they struggle to stick to a diet. Whereas men's hormones stay the same. So, you know, they're not really going to struggle as much as women with the hormones up and down. So for example, like if I'm like, I might be really like have really bad willpower in a diet. I'll be like, oh, there's chocolate sitting there, like I really want it, should I have it? And then I'm like, no, I won't. And then I'm like, no, I can't stop thinking about it. Whereas I find like my boyfriend will literally just be like, no, I'm okay, just like, or eat like one square of chocolate and be like, yeah, I'm fine. Whereas I'm like, no, I need to eat all of it. And I was talking to another coach about this, and he was like, yeah, I'm the exact same. Like, he was saying that he's really good at dieting, but his partner really struggles with it, and he just can't understand why, like why she has to eat the sweet stuff. And it's just, I just genuinely think women are not as efficient at dieting as men. Women also experience more food related conflict than men do. So in that they like fattening foods, or, you know, we enjoy sweet stuff, or most of us do anyway, but perceive that they shouldn't eat them. So you may find that women tend to fall into those like fad diets a lot more than men do, or like the sugar-free diet, stuff like that. So they like sweet food and sugar, but then they also think that they shouldn't eat them. So it kind of creates a bad dieting behavior and relationship with food, because they want it, but they're telling themselves they can't have it. But that can actually just worsen the relationship with food by maybe, you know, overeating, binging, stuff like that. So pressures to be thin are present in early adolescence, as noted by dieting behavior starting in very young girls. Women experience more dissatisfaction with their body weight and shape than men do as well. So I think it can kind of sometimes be like a negative circle. You know, women probably may feel shit about themselves, but then emotional eat, or, you know, they may just be in that dieting mindset of like, no, I can't have that, but I really want it. So I do think that, you know, it can just be different for everyone, but I do think that women genuinely struggle with like dieting more than men do. So yeah, so I think that's just something to keep in mind as well. Principles are still the same. So calories in versus calories out. A deficit will equal weight loss. So, you know, however you calculate your calories for clients, if you do, like I said, when I was a gym floor PT, I didn't, but now my job is slightly different, which I'll go through after. So you know, a calorie deficit is what we need for weight loss. So, you know, what you may have to do, like I spoke about previously, was put them in a calorie deficit, but maybe just let them have a couple more 100 calories around their period, or even just increase to maintenance for a few days. You know, over the scope of 4 weeks of a fat loss phase, a few days here at maintenance isn't really going to make a massive difference, especially if she needs it. It's better than going all out and having a massive binge and then her feeling guilty, and then, you know, possibly being like, okay, I'll restrict myself next week and I'll be really good, stuff like that. So I just find it can help a little bit. Women also have lower metabolic rates, so it can seem easier to put on weight than men. I think the reason for this is, I haven't actually got any studies like that I put in here for this, but obviously this is a fact, like women have lower metabolic rates because we have less muscle mass, which we just burn less at rest, and we're smaller. But I find that a lot of women can eat the same as their male partners. Or for example, me and my brother, when we were growing up, I could eat the same as him, maybe more. He'd literally stay like a stick. I'd gain the weight. So I do find that can be why women are like, oh, you know, I put on weight so easily. But I think it's just because we just simply cannot eat the same as men and have the same effect from it. So, you know, if I ate the same as what like my boyfriend ate, I'd be in a calorie surplus. So, you know, his dieting calories are my maintenance calories, for example. So, you know, if I ate the same as him, I'd be in a massive surplus. So I think it can be easy to be in a surplus for women without kind of realizing, if that makes sense. Scale weight in periods. So women's weight fluctuates all the time, which is why For myself, I still get women to weigh themselves. Also, really sorry guys, I'm trying to get through this really quickly, but there's just so much information. I even cut this quite short. So yeah, so women's weight fluctuates all the time. So if you are having female clients and weighing them, just be mindful of this. I think sometimes scale weight can be very inaccurate. I've had clients that have completely transformed their bodies, but their scale weight has changed maybe like a kilo or two. So I think that's important to keep in mind. I usually get clients to weigh like, you know, a few times a week. I mean, preferably for me, if I'm in a fat loss phase, I'd weigh every day if I'm being quite strict with it, just to get an average, because I don't do that to be like, oh, I need to see my weight drop every day. It's more of a fact like, okay, you know, if I'm coming up to my period, then I've got a 7-day like weight for every day. I can just average that out and I can get an average weight for it. So, you know, one day might be 67, one day might be 68, one day might be 66. And weight really can change quite a bit for women. So I prefer to use progress photos as well. I think progress photos can tell so much more than just weight. Ooh, I keep going through. There we go. So splitting the two, I'm going to, there we go. Sorry, guys. So make sure the client understands weight fluctuation is normal for being a female, because clients can get discouraged. You know, I still get clients, even though I say every single week, you know, on your period, your scale weight's higher. They still will maybe 4 weeks later come up to their period and weigh 2 kilos heavier and be like, I'm really, you know, disappointed with the weight gain this week. And I'm like, look, you've just got your period. This is 100% normal. Next week, let's see what it is. And it usually comes straight back down. So I think women can get really attached to the scale and really discouraged seeing it go up if they want to see it go down. So I think just reiterating to, you know, obviously there's scales in gyms, and I know when I worked in gyms, a lot of the PTs weighed their clients on the scales there. So I think it can just be important to make them aware that scale weight is going to fluctuate all the time, depending on what you've eaten in the day, depending on where you are in the cycle. You know, don't rely on that solely. But it can still be a good, obviously, part of data collection. Water retention is actually quite normal in the luteal phase, which is the second phase after ovulation. Women tend to be heavier in the second half of the cycle. So something else to keep in mind as well, which is why weighing women just and not having any idea of the cycle can be, I guess, a bit, you know, off, because you could weigh your client in the second half of her cycle and not realize, and then be like, oh, weight's increased or it's not changed, but not realize where she is. So yeah, so like I've said here, use other measures for females, as weight can be inaccurate if it's used by itself. So I still weigh my clients to get them to weigh, but I don't use it as a sole, like, you know, progress thing. Measurements can also increase in the luteal phase from water retention or just before the period. So keep that in mind if you're doing that as well. And that is it. So, I've just gone too far now. Yeah, so does anyone have any questions about anything? Let me just check the chat. I'll just stop share, and then I can just see anything. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, let me know. But I'll just quickly run through what James was talking about at the beginning. So I used to be a gym floor PT. I'm now just purely online. Went online about what are we now? February, about 10 months ago now. But I did work on the gym floor for about 3-4 years before I went online. And as James was saying at the beginning of the webinar, if anyone heard about PTs having practical experience being really important, I 100% agree with this. Like, I do think having in-person PT and working on the gym floor is so important for your career, because I just find that, you know, if you can't instruct someone on how to perform an exercise movement in person, how are you going to do it online? I think that's a really key important aspect as well. And you just learn, I guess, the sales side of personal training, because at the end of the day it is sales as well. You learn how to communicate with people, you learn from other PTs, you learn from your mentors, and I do really think that in-person PT is so important. And I definitely don't think I would have been able to go online without it, because I wouldn't kind of know what I do now. So with my clients, when I was on the gym floor doing PT, I did training with clients. I'd give them like meal advice, but I wouldn't give them like, here's your calories, blah, blah, blah. It would kind of be more training focused, whereas online tends to be kind of everything in one package. So I definitely think online has shot up in popularity purely from COVID, because no one can actually, I don't know what the rules are. Are you even allowed to train one-to-one, or is it just walking or something?
I think so. I think you're allowed to train one-to-one if
you
you're masked and outside, I think.
Well, that's not helpful. It's like -5 degrees, is it?
You can't all be training people on a beach in Oz, Sophie.
I know, true. I'm waiting for the summer days to come back, but yeah, like I do think that in-person PT is like so important, and I do think it's a great starting point, just because you do learn so much from even like managers, because usually gym managers have been PTs themselves. You just learn a lot more than you would if you were to just go at it online straight away. Not to mention as well, when you're on the gym floor, if online is something you would like to do in the future, being on the gym floor is a great way to build a client base, because, it's easier to get clients back into your business than it is to find new ones. So, keeping those clients, maybe even they'll come online with you down the track, building a brand and building a brand for yourself as well through gym floor PT to maybe go online a couple years later or whenever it is you want. So I think both have the place, but I do still think that, I don't think that in-person PT is going to go out. Whereas I have seen like people be like, oh, there won't be a demand for in-person PT anymore, which I completely disagree with. I think 100% there will be, because there's always going to be people that just be like, no, I need an in-person PT to tell me what to do. And there also is going to be people that have never been to the gym before and don't know how to squat or deadlift. And online isn't going to be right for them, because, if I'm online, it's not Zoom sessions. It's not me doing like a workout with them. It's, here's your training program, like one-to-one support, all kind of stuff like that. So if they don't know how to squat, online's not going to be great for them. They need an in-person PT to help them learn the basics and stuff like that. So if any of you are kind of worried about, with COVID and stuff, in-person PT kind of not being as popular as it was, I definitely don't think that's the case at all. I still think it's going to be. And when the gyms reopen, I think people are going to be wanting someone to motivate them again, because a lot of people probably, especially with being winter, probably haven't been training and may even be like, yeah, I definitely need someone to motivate me. So I still think in-person PT is, going to be just as good, if not better than it was before as well. But yeah, so that's all I've got. If anyone has any questions, obviously just feel free to let me know. But yeah, I'll hand over to you, James.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, if anybody has any questions, then feel free to kind of unmute yourselves or just put them in the chat. I was just writing down a couple of questions as you were going that I think might be quite cool to get answers to. So I'll put them to you. And then if anybody else has any questions, as I say, just pop it in the chat as we're talking. I don't know if you covered this or not, but the during your consultation phase with clients, do you cover anything about their cycles and how it might impact them? Is that part of your questioning, or do you just not mention it at all until it may come up later down the line?
No, so I think because, see, when I was an in-person PT, I would obviously in the health form, I did say like, do you have any, conditions or anything I need to know about? And people may tend to put like, endometriosis or PCOS in there. But when I was an in-person PT, I didn't really ask specifically about menstrual cycles. Whereas now that I've kind of gotten into it a lot more since then, I do talk about it on Instagram a lot, and that's where I sort of do my online coaching. So I think people kind of come to me with the expectation of that's kind of my style. So I will have someone maybe just be like, yeah, I've also got PCOS. And then they're like, I've seen you obviously talk about it. So I'll be like, okay, sweet. And then go through that. But I usually, in the health form that I get them to fill out before they start, I do say like, do you have a regular cycle, or do you have any issues with your cycle? So I do bring it up now, but when I was just doing PT in the gym, I didn't. It could possibly be an idea to just be like, do you have any like known issues with menstrual cycle, just in case. But I mean, I think just because of what I promote on Instagram, I tend to get people just kind of like tell me anyway, if that makes sense. But in the health form, I definitely do ask.
And do you think as a male PT training female clients, do you think this is something that you can approach with a female client as a male PT?
This is a really good question. I've had someone actually message me about this before. I think, yeah, I mean, I had a coach message me and say like, I've tried to bring up menstrual cycle, like I did a webinar for another group of coaches, and he messaged me after. I was like, I've tried to bring it up with my female clients, but some of them think it's weird that I'm asking, because he didn't start straight away asking. He kind of did it like after coaching them for a while. I think the problem is it's still a taboo subject when it shouldn't be. I think if you just go in confidently with it and just, you know, make it seem normal and don't be uncomfortable with it, because that's going to make someone else feel uncomfortable if they get the vibe that you're feeling awkward talking about it. But I definitely think it's a great thing for male PTs to talk about with their female clients, because in all honesty, a lot of females don't know about their own cycle. So if you're a male and you can, I mean, for example, James Smith did a really good female, like training females menstrual cycle video, IGTV, I think. And the comments on that were incredible. It was like, wow, I can't believe a male knows more about cycle than me. I can't believe I've never heard of this stuff. So I think it can be a really good thing for men to start, or male PTs to start talking about with clients. And if you just go in straight away and be like, look, your cycle can, I mean, if you want to ask, you can, you know, saying your cycle can affect your training and nutrition. Do you mind if we just kind of, you know, touch base sort of where you're at in your cycle and, you know, how it's affecting you and stuff like that. But yeah. I definitely don't think it's like a disrespectful thing at all. And I think if someone is taking it like that, I mean, it's more of a problem with them, not something you've done wrong, which is what I said to this other coach. I said, you know, it's not your fault. It's that some people are still a bit sensitive with it, and it is still considered taboo to some people, and they may be uncomfortable talking about it. Worst case scenario, if they don't want to talk about it with you, then I mean, it's kind of their loss, because it does affect their training and nutrition. But I do think it's a good thing for male PGs to talk about with female clients. Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you. And then the other thing is, and obviously you touched on this, is low calorie diets. And this is a thing that obviously we see being in the industry a lot from a lot of people. Yeah. How do you, obviously it's a massive subject, we could go on to a whole other conversation about it, but how do you start your clients off? Do you get them to keep a 7-day diary and then, you know, reduce it by 200 calories to see if they're coming down in weight? Or, you know, because you will get a lot of PTs that will straight away go, cool, right, 1200 calories, go. So how do you kind of set your clients up with what deficit they should be in? Yeah, so I calculate their calories based on the age, height, and weight and activity level. So I kind of, you know, see what their activity level is like, how many times a week are they going to be training, do they have an active job? And what I try and do is always, I think it's safer to start someone on too high of calories and maybe the first couple of weeks not drop any weight and have to drop the calories, rather than just going straight in with a low calorie diet. So what I do is in the health form, height, weight, age, activity level. So I get information about their job, how many steps do you do a day? And then from there, I'll calculate their like average, you know, deficit calories that they need. And I always try and start them on the highest as possible. So for example, activity level, I might put it up like, or make it the highest that it can be. So if someone's like, yeah, I'm training 3 times a week, I'm doing, you know, 8,000 steps a day, I might put them on like pretty active rather than just lightly active or whatever the settings are. And just try and put them at the highest possible to, you know, lose fat, and then drop it as needed. So I usually say kind of like a 10 to, I mean, I'd probably say a 10 to 15% deficit. So if someone's maintenance is, you know, 2,200 calories, 10% of that is what, 220 calories. So you could even, like, if you wanted to kind of, it depends on obviously the time scale they've got as well. So, you know, if they're like, right, I've got a photo shoot in 12 weeks, you may take a more aggressive approach. If they're not in a rush and they're like, you know, just want to lose fat in however long it takes, then I'd 100% start at the highest possible. Maybe like a 10 to 15%, drop it over time, see how they go. If their weight stalls or you aren't seeing any progress within their photos, then I'd probably, you know, drop it. But rule of thumb for my clients is if they're going really well after about 4 weeks and they're still losing fat because they've got like a high energy job, or they've increased their training sessions, or they've increased their steps, I won't change the calories. If steps and training are staying the same because they can't fit any more in, After about maybe 3 to 4 weeks, if weight's kind of really slowing down, then I probably will drop the calories by around 150 to 200 at a time, depending on what the calories are and what the person thinks they can manage.
Okay.
Hope that makes sense. So,
yeah,
like, yeah. It's one of those subjects where you could like make it really broad.
yeah, definitely. It could be a whole webinar in itself. And lastly, just have you got any, are there any books or social media accounts or anything that anybody can follow or buy if they want to learn more about the topic?
Yeah, definitely. So there's 2 really good women's health specialists. What I'll do is I'll put them in the comments so you can actually keep them. But there's Lara Bryden and Jolene Brighton, who are 2 of my favorite women's health specialists. They're not personal trainers, so they don't talk about training or stuff like that, but they delve into the menstrual cycle quite a bit. So both of them have books. I think Jolene's is called Beyond the Pill. Lara's is called The Period Repair Manual. Now they delve into it quite deeply, so it depends on how obviously deep you want to go into it. Otherwise, I think honestly one of the best places to learn is Instagram and stuff like that. I think you can actually learn quite a lot from it, and I post about it from quite a lot as well. I will also be doing like a few webinars, down the track on a bit more specific, like training females and stuff. It'd probably be closer to around 2 hours so that I can fit everything in. Today's I was like rushing and I had to cram it in because there's actually so much information. In all honesty, like I think like reading up on it is the best thing you can do, and just maybe even learning from other people, other coaches, stuff like that.
Yeah, cool. So just to finish up, where can people find you? Just to, obviously we tag you in everything we do, but if anybody's interested in looking at what you do, if you want to pop that in the chat as well. And then you mentioned you've got some other webinars coming up. So if anybody's interested in learning more, do they just contact you or?
Yeah, so I haven't launched it yet. I'm probably going to launch it either this month or next. But it'll all be through my Instagram, which I've just put in the chat. So I guess if your niche is training females, then it could definitely be something like cool to get involved in. I only train females, so it's quite an important subject for me to, I guess, learn more into. So if that's the same as you, then yeah, hopefully it can be helpful when I launch it, or you can just reach out to me and we can obviously chat about it as well.
Yeah, awesome. Perfect. That's everything from me. I don't think we've had any other questions at all. So cool. Thank you very much, Sophie.
No worries. Sorry for running over.
That's all right. No worries. It's all good. All good.
10 minutes is better than my other ones. Brain overload.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Nice one. Cheers, Sophie. Thank you.
See you later.
Bye.